Hi everyone, good to see you here today. I'm going to host this session, and we're just going to wait for some other people just to jump in over time. If you have a question, just let's put it in the Q&A, and also put my LinkedIn out there. So if you want to connect with me afterwards, or have a specific question, happy to do so. So yeah, let's give it a go. So my name is Arthur. I'm working for Knight Capital. I'm a former founder and currently the authors of Leaders of Growth. Maybe just to tell a little bit of the story. I joined Startup World in 2014, and I've always been super fascinated about how do you grow and scale a company. But that's been sort of the thing I always wanted to discover. And then last year I was talking with my colleague Diederik on. We want to create more content as a VC, because I'm, as I said, working for Knight Capital. And then we had some ideas. And then once on a rainy day in November in the Netherlands, I got in touch with Bill Makaitis, who was former CEO of Slack, and we were chatting. And then after a while, I just thought, I have an idea about a book, but nothing more concrete. Let's basically just write if Bill wants to join in this book. And from there he said yes, basically, and from there that was the reason why I started writing a book called Leaders of Growth. And basically all the interviews and then all the learnings I got from there, I'll basically summarize them today. So just to dive into it, let me see. Tech is always hard. So today we're talking about scaling, and specifically on how you navigate the challenges going from Series A to B to C. And the reason why I do it and why I'm so passionate about this topic is because I see that only 7% of the companies that raise a seed round actually make it to a Series B. So I'm not arguing here that all of that, what I'm going to share today, is going to lift this number up to 100%. But it's definitely there are some scaling challenges which I think companies can solve, and I hope that this presentation is part of that solution. So just going back to the statistic, why do only so few people make it to the Series B and C stage? And what's interesting is that the head of customer success at Calendly said, there is no real playbook for it, and therefore people lack the tools in order to really scale to the level that is needed. So based on these inputs and all the further statistics, I've worked on a framework on how to scale a company going Series A to C. And this is not just my inputs. Of course, it's part of it, because as a VC, I'm involved with many companies and see how they grow. Of course, we've also done desk research. But the main thing on which the framework is built is basically the people that you can see here, the 47 experts that I interviewed in my book, Leaders of Growth, and where I asked them, how did you scale from Series A to B to C? What were your learnings? What were your insights? And that is what is basically bundled together in this book. And the learnings from that I'm going to share with you today. So there are 3 learnings which I want to touch on quite quickly. It's first, the scaling is a continuum with maturity stages. The second is that scaling challenges can be categorized into 5 buckets. And the third thing is that scaling is all about knowing your scaling drivers. I will particularly spend a short time on the first one, spend most time in learning 2, and then move to learning 3, which is also quite interesting. So the first one, scaling is a continuum with maturity stages. So what do I mean with it? So back in the days when I joined the startup world back in 2014, and even until a few years ago, I thought that scaling happens after you get product market fit. So you get product market fit, and then there's and afterwards you scale, and it's sort of a linear sequential stage, which is obviously not the case. Because product market fit is not something you have once, but which you constantly have to figure out. Every time you internationalize or target a new customer segment or launch a new distribution model, in all of that, you have to get product market fit. So scaling is much more of an iterative process, which is also not just one stage, but it's actually a continuum. And how I like to define scaling is just to define it in 5 substages, which are the ad hoc stage. Basically, you just start and nothing is really processed. It's just everything is ad hoc, as it says. Then you have basic processes. Maybe you work with Excel, you work in Word and PowerPoint, and that's how you roll. Then in a repeatability stage, it's really about having replicable processes. Then you move to predictability, which is the same as repeatability, but then you have to make everything predictable. And at scale, you do the same, but then on a much larger scale. So that's how I look to scaling. So also if you see in the news, like, and you get advice from people on how to scale your company, that's always very important to keep in mind, like, where are these people that are giving me that advice? Because if you're scaling and you're in the basic process stage, you might get much more input from people that are in this stage, in the repeatability stage. So just moving onwards, what I like to make the point, which is building on what I just said, is that the seed stage is, I would say, mostly related to there everything is ad hoc and you have some basic processes. Then in your Series A, there is like repeatability. In Series B, you should aim for predictability, and in your Series C, it's all about scaling on a large scale. And that's sort of also how I look to scaling. So with this, I would say, fundamental layer being presented, I move into the main topic of today, which is what are the real scaling challenges that a company can have going from A to B to C. So from all the interviews that I had, all the 47, and now I'm also having the podcast, and I'm having had many more conversations in the meantime. And what it constantly drills down to are 5 challenges. And these 5 challenges are KPIs and data, people, documentation and enablement, processes, and tooling. So if you can overcome all of these challenges, you can be much more successful in scaling. That's basically what I'm trying to say here. So if you look to the KPIs and data challenge, I'm just going to give a few examples of the people that participated in the book. So I start with Ray Reich. That's the lowest one, and the great point that he shares is that it's very important to compare your company and in the metrics and everything you do to companies in a similar stage, because otherwise you're basically comparing apples and pears, which then obviously gives you the wrong information to act on. Then the second one is from Yaniv Liven. He has founded a company called Panoply, and what he argues is that we have to use our gut feeling much more. As companies, we're very much inclined to start making our decision making all based on data, which is great. However, if you're scaling a company, you have like limited time, and also the volume of data that you get is quite limited. But therefore, it's much more important that you also use gut feeling as opposed to only being data driven. And then the third example is from Ben Murray, who basically argues like focus on the right metrics in the right stage. So if you're in a seed stage company and you have a lot of metrics on lifetime value to acquisition cost ratio, that's potentially not the right thing to do. Whereas focusing on the retention metrics or how your product is used, that's much more relevant in the seed stage. And then when you get to Series A or Series B or Series C, then other metrics become more important over time. Then moving into the people challenge. So what was interesting is that I saw that many of the people that I was able to interview, they frequently mentioned that there is like a big challenge on the HR side when scaling a company. And I guess this is not like a big surprise, but here are like a few very tangible insights that people shared, which I found quite insightful. So if I start with Mark Roberge, is what he argued is that lots of people, once they raise funding, and potentially you are in this stage, that once they raise funding, they immediately start hiring loads of people, which is actually like a big risk for a company. You can much better pace your hiring. So you just build talent pools, and then every month you add one one salesperson, for instance, for the next 6 months. And after those 6 months, you add 2 people. And then after that, 4, 8, etc. And that is a much more durable, sustainable way of looking to scaling and hiring. Then another thing what I really like is from Mike Diaz, is where he says you really have to mix like talented newbies, so people who do everything for the first time, like you're building a company. You have to mix your team with people who have done it before, and not only betting on people who do it for the first time. And what's also very important, and maybe disappointing to hear, is that Richard Brooks argues that people in different stages have different skill sets. So if you're in a seed stage, you are much more of a generalist, and potentially when you, for instance, grow to your Series B or your Series C stage, a different skill set is required as a company, and not everyone is able basically to reinvent him or herself. And as a consequence, you will see that people are leaving every so often. But looking at the time, I will just speed up a bit. Like, here is the documentation and enablement challenge, and what this mentions is that you have to document everything what you do well, because otherwise people, like 1 year later, when your company has basically grown, let's say 3x, don't remember what you've done, why you did it, and as a consequence of that, they don't dare to touch certain things that you've built, for instance, in your code, or they're making mistakes or doing things over and over again, which is of course you lose time on that, but it also costs a lot of money. On the process challenge, it's very important that once you raise as a company, and you particularly when you get to Series A, B, and C, it becomes much more about efficiency and execution mindset. And that's why I really like the comment of Mike Diaz, is to say you have to really build this organizational rhythm as a company. So focus a lot on your dailies, your weeklies, your monthlies, because you have to systemize your business and really make it an execution machine. And Alexander Teuma, he argues that you really need to have an organizational OS. So if you're a company in this stage with 20 FTE or more, it's very good to just read books and use. I will share afterwards like a book that has been written related to this topic, which I think is very useful to adopt. So in the tooling stage, fit stage, we are really looking into, be aware that the tools you implement today might not be the tools you use 12 to 24 months from now. And it might sound like, okay, why don't I already implement the tools which I'm going to need in the future? And that's just not interesting. So if you implement, for instance, Salesforce right now, when you're like a 10 FTE type of company, that's way too early. It's much better to start doing that when you are, let's say, at 100 FTE type of business. So what you have to realize is that this is like a natural consequence of the fast growth, and this is not a problem that you're constantly implementing new types of tools. So the third learning is about scaling drivers, which I'm going to keep short because of the time. I would say it's also the least impactful one. What I'm basically arguing here is that it's very important to know, like, okay, so what are your drivers for scaling? For some, if you grow your customer size to, let's say, a few hundred, that basically means you have to become much more mature in your processes, or you have to document different things, or you have to hire different people. And that's basically what this says. You have to identify what are these drivers for scaling, and based on that, you can act better and have this North Star in your team. So all in all, just to make it a bit more practical on what I just shared before, I think I have 3 recommendations. First is that you build a support network of people that have been 12 to 24 months ahead of where you are today. The second is that you let someone have ownership on this whole scaling challenge as a company. And I recommend hiring a head of scaling who just reports to the COO and who is primarily focused on the next 6 to 12 months, whereas the COO is mainly focused on, I would say, the current business. And the third recommendation is that it's very good to build a scaling roadmap for each sub-department. That's basically where I have the next slides on, which is, if you're building a scaling roadmap, it's actually quite interesting that we have product roadmap, but we sometimes have a hiring roadmap, but we don't have a scaling roadmap. How do you get your organization from a repeatability stage to a predictability stage, or from a predictability stage to an at-scale stage? So all the things we just discussed. So the first step is basically identifying what are the departments for which you want to prepare your scaling roadmap. So for instance, you take, let's say, customer success. And then in the second stage, you basically think like, okay, so if I'm basically plotting how an organization and how scaling looks like, on the different scaling stages for all these challenges that we just discussed, you just take a piece of paper and write down, how is my organization going to look like? And then the next stage is about, okay, I've just defined what, for instance, repeatability means, or what a predictable customer success organization look like. But then you have to identify, what are these sort of triggers that bring you from the first to the other stage. And that is important because, of course, if you know that and you build your budget and your planning and your OKRs, you can sort of look ahead and know when to transition to another stage. And then one of the last points is that once you know how the maturity stages look like, you start looking like, okay, what do I have to, what is required in the next 18 to 24 months? And based on that, like, okay, I have to be in a predictability stage in Q3. So that means going to the last step, this and this are all the action points that I have to implement in the next months. And which is then, of course, owned by this head of scaling and then executed together with the functional departments. So I see I just made it in time. Sorry for rushing through the presentation, but what I really hope is that this presentation is going to help you, and that I see more companies scaling from seed to Series C. And good luck with that. If you have any question, there are 2 points that you can ask anything in the Q&A, but also you can see that in the chat it has been written that we can move to sort of like a virtual 2D hangout. So you can see the link there. So also move there, and see you there in 5 minutes. Thanks, Diego. Diego is asking, how do you feel the current funding environment affects a company's approach to scaling? I would say that nowadays it's easier to raise money compared to before. So you can raise larger sums of money. So where you in the past had to approach it a bit more in a bootstrapped way and had to figure out everything, I think it's now much easier to if you talk about the maturity stages, that you can just hire people or like experts that just will have been 12 to 24 months ahead of where you are today, and just hire them, and they give you a lot of insights on how to approach scaling. And the second thing is, because there is money available, you can just move faster with hiring also specialists in your team. Does anyone else have an exciting question? So I propose to go already to this hangout. As you can see in the chat section there, you can see the link. So I hope to see you there, and I'll just spend like a few minutes on the questions that you have. But as I said, if you just want to connect with me, just connect over LinkedIn, and I'm very happy to help with any question that you might have. So I'm seeing you in the Q&A section.